Yeah, definitely. I'd just start by saying, Warami ora nora, Injimara Bayami Gunita Kunurpa, Injimara Nura Nurapa. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional people from whatever country you're zooming in from today, whatever Nurapa, and pay my respects to. We have a fellow we call the creator down our way. I know that you probably don't have the same fella out your way, but I'll say Bayami, so our creator, Gunita Mother Earth, but also to Huawei or the Rainbow Serpent, which I know you guys probably connect more to out in the APY lands as well. And thank our ancestors for keeping us strong and guiding us in whatever that we do as well. So, I've got a bit of a bio for you both. If it's all right, I'll read it. I've pulled this kind of in, so I hope I don't shame you up at all. But I think it's just important that I give a bit of a bio, but then also, more importantly, let you guys maybe tell a bit more of your story of who you are and where you come from. I don't think a bio would do either of you justice at all. So I'll start with Joe. Joe is a proud Wiradjuri Walgalu. Is that right, Joe? Walgalu First Nations Aboriginal man, born in Cowra, raised in Wagga. And Joe played in the National Rugby League for South Sydney Rabbitohs, Penrith Panthers and Canterbury Bulldogs. None of them are any good teams, but that's all right. Before switching, Joe switching to professional boxing in 2009. Joe's a two-time WBF World Junior Welterweight Champion, and recently, a few years ago now, won the WC Asian Continental title. Although forging a successful professional sporting career, Joe battled the majority of his life with suicidal ideation and bipolar disorder. After a suicide attempt in 2012, Joe felt his purpose was to help people who struggle with mental illness. Through customised workshops, Joe talks of dealing with adversity, struggles, resilience, addiction, connection, emotional well-being and healing, trauma in schools, communities, correctional services, sporting clubs and workplaces. As I said, I don't think that does Joe any justice, because he does a lot of work in this space. And I know he donates a lot of his time to many beneficial people. So thanks for joining us, Joe. I really appreciate it. And Dom is a Pitjantjatjara Yunkanjatjara man from the APY lands in far north Queensland, far north west South Australia. Sorry, didn't mean to call you Noongar there, brother. That's a bit. I mean,
we're going to move APY lands.
I'm with you right over to Murray country. Over to Murray.
Oh, man.
He played football at an elite level in the AFL for the Melbourne Football Club and Port Adelaide Football Club. He's currently studying psychology and is the co-chair of Iwiri, an organisation that seeks to strengthen cultural expression of Anangal living in Adelaide away from their homelands. Hugely important work, I have no doubt, especially when we're discussing our last session and the amount of our mob that are travelling across country and at times may get stuck somewhere. And I have no doubt that I haven't done you justice either there, brother, with a bio as well. But, welcome. Thanks you both for coming. For some reason, that's my pleasure. Where do we want to start? Do you guys want to just kind of build on the bio a little bit? Dom, do you want to talk a little bit more about your story?
So I grew up in Alice Springs, but then also, strong ties to Freedom out in the APY lands. And, so I was originally, before football, I was playing a lot of tennis, and that's how I ended up in Melbourne through Yvonne Goolagong's scholarship, and that was an eye opener, I guess. Moving away from country from a young age, and all of those, I guess, just a different lifestyle, different different kind of world. And so that was, and then you don't realise, I think, from a young age where, because you're just floating and going through the motions, and you reflect on it when you get to 23, 24, even 25 now, and, just like how strong of a base country is, I guess, and family support networks. And when you lose that, you kind of go off the rails. And that's what I found probably, when I moved away from a young age, and then really came to, I guess, to life through some of the actions when I was like, late teenage years, 18, 19, and 20 years old, in Melbourne, and so I guess, and that's when I had to leave Melbourne when I was 21, I reckon, and go back home to the AP Wildlands so I could actually reconnect with that again, because that's how important it is to have that strong, secure base. And because, for all those years, for those 6 years I was living in, 6-7 years living in Melbourne, and you just lose that. And so I left Melbourne, when I was 21 to go back to the AP Wildlands to, really, really connect again and go for men's business and find that side of the identity that I was kind of missing.
Yeah, lovely. And I think we're not going to hear all that dissimilar story from Joe a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about your story as well, Joe?
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Brother Dom. It's so similar, like to so many of our men across the country. Like the way I describe it is that, again, off country at a young age, the bright lights of the city, into a space that probably wasn't overly nurturing. When you move to Sydney to be a sports person, it's the bright lights, something that's extremely attractive, that come from the bush or from a regional town. But it's something that so many young Aboriginal men are faced with, especially along the east coast in the southern states. It's the way I describe it, I alluded to earlier. It's like I grew up as an Aboriginal man, knowing that I was Aboriginal, but I didn't know what it was like to be an Aboriginal, because I was too white to be black, but too black to be white. Like I didn't really fit in either world. And when I say I'm Aboriginal, I was ostracised by non-Indigenous people in certain spaces. But then when I said that I was Aboriginal to young people who were connected right across the country, it's like, well, and it's probably not coming from the space of the Aboriginal people, but the non-Aboriginal people was like, well, you're not a real one. You don't live the stereotypical way of life that was talked about for so long. And it took me, I always go back to two really, really important conversations in my life. And when we talk about what Brother Dom said, talking about, the certain roles and responsibilities that we have in life, and our rite of passage as young men to become men, young boys to become men, happened for thousands of years. And then when that space has been disconnected, when that space, you're traveling through a time in your life where you don't fit, and it's not physically, it's more spiritually. You don't fit, So those two conversations where I was always diagnosed with a mental illness, I was always talked about by psychologists and psychiatrists, psych ward stays, all of that stuff, when I was at my lowest or worst, mentally and emotionally, on the back of suicide attempts, all that sort of stuff. But it was the two really, really special men that I refer to in the conversations with those men. It's that the first one was with Uncle Paul Gordon, and he said, "I'll tell you what's wrong with you. You're not mentally ill." And that was a conversation for me that I didn't really get. I didn't really understand. And it was like, because that's what I'd been told for so many years. So I just believed it, because you look at doctors in the medical world and you take it on face value and you go, well, they know what they're talking about, right? So I was diagnosed with mental illness, told I had XYZ wrong with me, and I need to do XYZ to fix me. And when that wasn't fixing me, I obviously needed something else. And when Uncle Paul said, you're not mentally ill, you're spiritually ill. As soon as you heal your spirit, you'll get well. And then on the back of that conversation, there was another conversation when it was time, obviously very delicate in what we say and how we say it, but it was time for me to go through that rite of passage. And that conversation was with a man who's been in a part of these chats. Is Uncle Paul Callaghan? Has he been on yet, or is he coming on?
He's coming on later on with Nunkari.
Yeah. So Uncle Paul Callaghan actually said to me, he said, which backed up Uncle Paul Gordon's conversation, was, you stick close to the stuff that you learn out here, then all your mental health problems will go away, which then talked about healing the spirit again, right? So the more I concentrated on healing the spirit and doing what I needed to do to heal my spirit, which is, again, the more you know and the more you understand as Aboriginal people, spirit that's been there for thousands and thousands of years, generation on generation. Once we heal that, for me, I started to get well. So for me now, when I'm not mentally well, I know I've got to do stuff for my spirit, not for my mental health. If you know what I mean, if you understand that. I think Aboriginal people will understand that a lot, or people who are connected our ways will understand that. But you also look at, I'll give you an example, you also look at people who are deeply spiritually connected throughout the world with different faiths and different belief systems that we have. People who are deeply spiritually connected are usually people who are fairly mentally, physically, and emotionally well. So for me, it was without doubt the biggest healer for me. Again, my story is on the back of some fairly severe concussions. I've had a dialogue inside my head that's told me to end my life every day since I was the age of 13. That fairly negative dialogue has spoken to me, planted thoughts, plans, and ideas of suicide every day. And what I've done to stay alive is clearly working, or worked, So now I go around and I share that story, and especially in our communities, the First Nation communities, where we are probably we're struggling to live between two worlds. Right, our teacher, Uncle Paul, he always talks about finding a balance in living between two worlds, because we need both of them, right? And you look at some communities are extremely strong in the non-Indigenous new way of life, but not strong culturally connection-wise. That's what I was. And then we look at many other communities I've been to, deeply, strongly connected to their First Nation and ceremonial way of life, but struggle in a new concept of life, where there is things like processed foods, sugars, alcohol, those type of things. So it's finding a balance between those two worlds. I do a lot of stuff, a lot of writing about this sort of stuff. I've been involved in a project with Phil of late. And I'm in talks at the moment to do some further study next year, which will be a research project, which will take me a while to do. But it's exciting stuff. But it's about changing the narrative from white doctors telling us what's wrong with us and how to fix it, to researching and documenting what we always did that fixed us.
And we're definitely going to touch on that a little bit later as well with Antac and also Uncle Paul Callaghan around how traditional healing and our ways of healing are really important. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your yarn there, Joe. I'll jump in because I'm going to be like that. You know what I'm like. But I love the fact that in lots of ways, almost worlds apart, you two guys, even though through Songline and Nurumpa we're all connected, but there's this continuity between an experience. But again, both individual people and your story is also very unique to yourselves, but so connected. Phil, do you want to ask a question, or do you want me to jump in?
I was just thinking, same sort of thing, really, similar stories. Dom, I'm thinking about when you went down to Adelaide and you were playing professional football in Adelaide as well, and, whether it was Melbourne or Adelaide, I can't quite remember, but when you made the decision to go back home, to go through ceremony, go through business and those things, what was going on for you at the time? I mean, what made you go, look, here you've got this incredible opportunity to play sport at an elite level, stuff that people dream of. Some other people have gone before you from Central Australia, Liam Jarrah, Amos Frank, others, and you're there playing in the stadium. What is it that's going on for you that you make a decision to go back home, back to Kalajiti, back to Freegon?
Yeah, so I guess you look at it and just another link in the chain of like a long history of people that have gone before me, and that's what I kind of battled with from a young age. Like not really, understood, I guess, from a young age that it's we've got proud, strong men within my own family, but then within the Freegon community, and then the wider APY community, and then you can expand that to what you would know as like Ngullungus and Bumbles and stuff, and it connects the whole of Central Australia together. And I kind of looked at that, and I was battling that for a long time in terms of that individually. I didn't want to break that chain, but then also I was so connected, and I wanted to continue line of strong black men and proud animal men going through culture, and I was they kind of understood my position growing up in both worlds, and they gave me the leeway, because a lot of people my age were going through a lot younger. They were like 17, 16, 17, 18, but I was 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years later after that. So they understood that, but then within my own personal journey, I felt like I needed to go back to that, to really find that side of me, because I felt like I'd achieved what I wanted to. I got a year 12 education, and everything in the Western world. I'd owned the car, done all those good things, had a house, done all those good Western things, but then in my Aboriginal culture, animal culture, I was missing out on that. And there was, there was an interesting point that Brother Joe just was speaking about, and the holistic approach of culture, and that's what I found when I went out bush. When I went through culture, is that there's a word, and I don't think there's probably an English translation for this, because it's so unique and so hard to find. But I'd imagine that would be a word that would be in every Aboriginal culture in Australia. But in picking that, there's kulini or kulinta, and that's like thinking, feeling, wanting to feel, wanting to think, having thought, and it encompasses a whole range of different meanings, but that's probably the connector of social emotional well-being out in the APY lands for animal people. And when your kulini or your kulinja, kind of fades and is diverted on a different path, you lose your, I guess, like mental health. And your kulinja, your kulini can be connected through personal relationships with human beings, animal people, but then also personal relationship with Mura and country and land. And that's what I found, was that, my kulini was just all over the place when I was in Melbourne, because that was when I left Melbourne to go back to the APY lands. My kulini was all over the spot, just gone from an animal sense. But when I went back to strengthen those ties of my kulini with my family, and then with Mura and the homeland, and where my grandfather grew up, my grandmother was living, at that time, and my kulini, because you could feel like the when you're walking around with your bare feet, you can feel the the ground, and that's like, you know, you're feeling through your toes, the kulini, you're listening to the land, but you're understanding, you're thinking, you're feeling, all of those things. And then, you know, even in the personal relationships, and I think that's probably, you know, as Anil people, that's probably, you know, one of our greatest words, I guess, and greatest, and there's so many different interpretations, but, you know, through strengthening that kulini, that you know, really helped me to understand who I was as a young animal man coming through, you know, the world.
Yeah, and that gives you a place then, right? Like you're talking about kulini or kulinya palyarin kunjaku, like, you know, making your thinking strong. And probably when you're in Melbourne, maybe the opposite of that is something like wajilarini. You know, you're homesick, you're longing for that connection, and when you're back at Freegon, you've found that, and then you can carry that with you. You've got a place now. You know those connections. You know those songs. You're strong again.
Yeah.
We call it wingara or gatgat for us. Like it's to think and to be and to have that path constantly the right way all the time. Because when it's not right and your belly's not right, you're lost. You can't see, you can't hear. It's like having a wet blanket over you, you know, and you're lost completely. And I think exactly what Joe was. I think for you, brother, it was the same feeling. You know what? If you could walk us through something similar, what that was like for you with when you were playing at that elite level and the journey you were taking on for that, and ultimately, I know that's what led you back to law, to Nuremberg.
Yeah, I think for a non-Indigenous concept of it, it's like a yearning. It's like you don't know what it is, but you just feel that pull, and you know, and I think it was again Uncle Paul, you know, talking about, you know, when we get homesick, right? Is that everyone always says, oh, you know, them blackfellas always get homesick. They want to go walkabout, right? But it ain't about being homesick. It's about our spirit being called back home. You know, so for me, I've lived off country a big part of my life, you know. But when I've always come home, it's always, and I guess we're lucky that Wiradjuri is one of the bigger nations. I think that everyone wants to move into our area and everyone want to be like us, but good ways.
Foundation of culture, humility.
I always laugh at when I go into communities. I say that I'm a Wiradjuri Woggaloo man. For those people who don't know where the Wiradjuri Nation is, it's the really big one, or others people, you know, regard it as the number one, and we're the best dancers and we're the best looking and we're the best, you know, and then everyone's, hey, yeah, well, you know, everyone gives it to you. It's a good way to break the ice. But yeah, for us, it's like that in the English terminology for those non-Aboriginal people. It's like a yearning. It's like being pulled to home. And the two words in our language is Winangara, which means to hear, think, and listen, and Winangadalinya, which is to know yourself. Is to know yourself and being like super self-aware of what it is that you're feeling and why it is that you're feeling. So you notice that there's similar trends with a lot of all of it. Like, we know it, but there's similar trends with all of our mobs, that we have different words because we have different languages for different things, but we all have, you know, similar or same meanings for different things as well. So.
How important is that? Like, if we can go off script for a bit, how important is that language, being able to reclaim that language? Or, I mean, Dom, you grew up, you know, half sort of Alice Springs, between Alice and Freegon, speaking Pitjantjatjara, Yankunytjatjara. You know, there's been a whole lot of work happening in New South Wales to reclaim language. And I mean, you've all just been able to really quickly kind of rattle off, oh yeah, we've got a word for that, that's what this is. How important is that sort of reclaiming of language to your mental health and your well-being?
What a lot of people don't realize as well is that, again, like looking at ways that we, there is layer on top of layer of deeply embedded trauma within our communities, right? But one of the most effective ways to look at overriding or navigating our way through the trauma, or clearing up the mess that's in our brain with that, is a little process that we call neuroplasticity. But one of the easiest ways to do that is through learning language. And we look at especially Aboriginal people, and again, Brother Dom, I speak purely from my perspective of a young Aboriginal boy who didn't know my language and still only know little tiny bits of it. It's a process that and you're right, Phil, it's about reclaiming that, and it gives you a sense of empowerment. But I think now that we're starting to, when we speak our old language, when we learn our old languages, them old people that have been dormant down this part of the country for a hell of a long time, a couple of 100 years, it awakens them old people. It awakens them, and there's a real sense in empowerment of that, but also speaking language to your kids and things like that. I just saw Deborah put in a question: do you think language should be taught in primary schools? We get this conversation all the time around, we'd love to have an Aboriginal national anthem, but we got 2,500 different dialects of language, like which one we're going to do it in. That's the hardest thing, is that I think that language should be taught in primary schools, in preschools, daycare centers, and specific to the area. Localize it. It's one thing teaching Wiradjuri language here, but let's revitalize the languages right throughout the country, which will empower the people on the ground, which again will look to override the trauma, which again brings about the strengthening identity, right? So it's about everyone, not Aboriginal people too, learning that, and gives them some tools and knowledge about. I don't know about you guys, but and ladies, I learned Indonesian at school. I ain't never going to go to Indonesia. No disrespect, but
at the moment, no one's going to Indonesia. No one's going anywhere at the moment.
But I would have loved to learn my own language. My dad, we're lucky that Uncle Stan Grant has been really vital in bringing the language back to life in Wiradjuri country, and Uncle Stan's direct relative of us. So when my dad got sick a few years ago, 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, when he got cancer, so he didn't let himself leave the house, right, because of his immune system, all that sort of stuff. So he went to Uncle Stan and said, "Give me 6 months worth of work and I'll learn it," right? And then walk into my dad's bedroom, because the old school parents sleep in separate rooms and stuff like that. My dad's room's like, that movie Dangerous Minds with Russell Crowe, where there's just like words all over the walls and stuff like that. Like, my dad's room is like chalkboards everywhere, and there's language all around everywhere. So he taught himself in like a 6 to 8 month period how to speak language. And he said that there were some words that he'd never seen before, but then there were also some words where he'd start to speak and it came out naturally, like it was sitting there dormant, waiting to be rebirthed again. So there's a real empowerment in learning language, especially for Aboriginal people.
So Dom, would you concur with that? Do you think the reclamation, or for you guys, just the continuation of speaking language is a huge part of good well-being for our people?
Absolutely, because there's so many so many elements like involved with language, and it's like you can builds relationships, obviously, just by just sitting down and yarning. So that's one thing, like you can, yeah, and my dad used, because he's a white fella, but he's taught himself how to, when he was, living out in the lands, and Phil could probably relate to this, language, it doesn't have a color, you know what I mean? It breaks down those barriers that if you can speak picking out of the old man, don't see you as black or white, really. In a lot of ways, because they can relate to you in a sense that the language binds you guys together, and that's what I mean when you're sitting out there and you're yarning, or you're listening and you're singing the songs and you're engaging in that. It's the emotional side of the brain. It obviously ignites that, and then that goes to the heart, and then you just feel better as a young person or an old person. But I think it's so important that language, because there's you can obviously sing in it, you normally speak in it, and you can just it just creates an opportunity to just build better relationships as well within your community.
Yeah, Dom, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening for Animal now? Because in terms of coming down from APY lands, a lot of people have been sort of either stuck in Adelaide because of COVID-19, or have chosen to live in Adelaide for the time being, or have medical appointments there and things like that. And you're the co-chair of IRI, which is working with a lot of those Arangu who are there in Adelaide, and also operating some first language classes, I guess, in that process as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's happening there for Arangu?
Yeah. So IRI was set up because a lot of our people from the APY lands, they come down for health reasons, dialysis, kidney failure, and they're coming down. But the nature of Aboriginal families, you take away a crucial element like a grandmother, everyone's coming with her. So then what we found is that we can, there's been an influx of Aboriginal people in Adelaide coming down here to live. But, within that, we decided to create a kind of a little hub where we can all come together and sing songs. And we had a summer school where we, for the people that, grew up in Adelaide, that are probably disconnected from that culture a bit from our animal families, it was an opportunity for them to sit down and listen and really learn and engage with our language and our songs and our culture. And so through that, some of the older ladies who are probably, in the last years of their life, they've lengthened their life just by, the connections that they're having with, engaging in their culture, engaging with their language, and building those relationships with their younger people who are going to continue on. And, through language, now some of the kids that have grown up down here in Adelaide are speaking, you're reeling off sentences. We're a year in now as an organisation, and, their language improvement seen in those young people is been so rapid that, that potentially, next year they could probably, even teach it themselves. But, that's been a success for us. But, also we've invited, people from outside, our animal community to engage in our languages and, engage in our songs and in our culture, because, that's probably, the best, I guess the easiest way to reconciliation in Australia is to invite and, let non-Indigenous people also be engaged in that so they can understand.
Yeah, I think it's a huge point. Like, the fact that we've got young fellas, interacting and speaking lingo and actually understanding the depth that lingo has, it's funny doing translation when you use a word like, for us, like Nurumpa, which really just means in English, my camp and my relationship with it, but it's got nothing on the true depth of the meaning. And so I think what it does, it gives our youth a much better understanding of the use of language when we're speaking traditionally, and I hate the word traditional because it's not traditional, we're still living it now, but when we're using our language, it actually starts to expand on their ability to understand a full use of a word rather than a singular word that English just gives us.
That
Yeah.
point, Stewie, I want to jump on as well. Is that that's what I love so much about our language is that people might say, "Can you give me the word for?" English has a one word, one meaning type thing, right? But we have the words that we have or sentences we have are said completely different to a word which means something completely different as well. That's been for me personally, that's been the real struggle for me relearning the language, is because there is so many different ways that you can say different things. And I'll say something to Dad, and Dad's just like, yeah, but like you're trying to say something the full, and you're meaning it, yes, but there's an easier way to say it just by chopping that sentence in half and saying this. I'm like, wow, like there's so much depth, especially in our language and languages.
And it explains why them old fellas only say something when they want to say it, like because they're real precise on what they say and when they say it and why they say it. Whereas it's something I'm still learning, because I'll talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, but then them old men Phil's laughing because he knows. But them old men will just be they'll only wait and speak when they need to speak, and that's why everyone listens when they speak. We've gone way off track, so I'm going to pull us back in a little bit because
what was the topic?
Yeah. I think we just turned this into our own conversation, which is great. But I'm going to bring us back just a tiny bit onto some of our path. And hang on, let me pull my questions back up here.
Talking about sport, right?
Yeah, we're talking about sport and the impacts of sport. So I guess one thing I wanted to lead to through this process was I think what I've heard you both say, and please jump in if I'm not saying this correctly, but the lack of grounding when in the professional, the elite sporting space for you guys led you both back home. Do you feel that for someone who has that grounding first, but then moves into the elite space, or is more able to navigate that space over a longer period of time? So that's one kind of thing I wanted to talk about. And number two, do you feel the industry may need to change to be more supportive of cultural men when needing to practice culture within the elite professional sports space?
I think, speaking from my perspective, and I get myself in trouble sometimes because I say things that people don't want to hear.
That's what we want to hear, Joe.
Well, I think knowing the depth of what it is that we've gone through with that cultural process, I see personally, I see the absolute benefits of it for men who would be in that system, right? So that's why for me, and my son's of age now, and he's getting to that point where he can really go left or right, whether or not he has a sporting career or whether he just goes down a path where it's not great for him. Where I think the stuff that we talk about and the stuff that, and obviously being very delicate with the wording of how I'm saying it, the stuff that we know and the processes that we've been through, know of importance of what it could do for some young man who could potentially go on that path. I know that I would have been a better rugby league player had I been through business before I went down there, right? Because of the tips and tools and grounding that it give me. But then when I go back to what I was going to say, the structure of the big system. How do they know if they've never done it? So you only know what you only know, and places like the NRL don't have anyone that I know of that's been through that process.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So how could they not know? How could they know that it's not beneficial if no one's done it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if people aren't advocating for it, and as you said, it's a delicate space. It's something that it's hard to have open conversation about because we're not allowed to.
Yeah.
But it's how do we learn to communicate that in a way that brings others along on the journey, but also understands what that there's a delicate nature, but also how do we share enough so people understand. Dom,
well, I'll be right in saying, Dom, as well, brother, that you fellas, especially in the AFL, because you're from, a lot of the players are from these areas that is extremely rich in the traditional practice, where on the East Coast there's not, right? So there would be players that come into the draft that have already been through business, and players that are, both sides of things, players that are in the system that haven't been through business, right?
Yeah.
So that those conversations could be had because people, whether they've been through that before they get drafted, know the process of it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, the hardest part about being in elite performance environments is that you're continuously judged, and you can from all angles. You're judged from, on and off the field, but more so, and they're equally as important. But it's a very scale 1 to 10 performance based, success or failure type of system. And you judge from the media, you judge from the fans, you judge from people within the club, supporters, the players, but the coaches as well within the four walls. And you're walking around and you're always judged. But with that, there's all these criteria and benchmarks to meet, and you're like you're walking around with a spotlight that's continuously on you, surveying your every move, and that doesn't align with a lot of Aboriginal practices, cultural practices, because from my experiences growing up in an animal world, it's very collectivist, kind of don't just be yourself, be in the moment, be present, and just be a young kid coming through and help. Equal opportunity. Don't try to be something you're not. And I feel like that was very conflicting in a Western sense, is where they wanted you to be extravagant. They wanted you to be the best. And so that was the two kind of conflicting views. But then also I think there's the AFL in particular, and I feel like they're doing this in the NRL as well, is that there's Indigenous rounds, All-Star games, and there's a real, I guess, hope from people within the management to really engage Aboriginal culture and put it at the forefront, especially through Sir Doug Nicholls' Indigenous round, where they're got the Dream Time at the G, and they've got smoking ceremonies that they do within the clubs that I've been involved in, and so they're really engaging in that sense. But I feel like there's still a lack within the AFL, I found, of people, psychologists or social workers with lived experiences, or an Aboriginal person, because there's a psychologist from WA, that Tracy Westerman, who speaks about there's this notion of culture-based syndrome, which is some things within our culture, like the sacred cuttings and the talking to spirits and nunkeries, that is so hard to tell or to relate to with the white person. And the majority of people within management and football departments are white, and they've got a Western experience. And if you might be struggling within a game or struggling within your personal life, and how can you, with a culture-based syndrome or culture-based action or whatever it is, relate to or get the other person to relate to your journey and your story and your culture stuff. And that was what, like, I was listening to, a speaker on ABC Listen, and she was an Aboriginal woman that was going to, sit down with a psychologist, but then the psychologist, 3 or 4 psychologists, couldn't relate to her, and that was and they kind of, just she couldn't relate to them, and the psychologist couldn't relate to her. So it was a twofold thing, and then and then you're not fixing the problem. And I feel like that's almost like, in the AFL clubs as well. If one person can't relate to the other and vice versa, it's you do see, people in my position come in and go out, and I feel like you gotta find, within AFL clubs, a person that, or more people within that understand.
Yeah, I think that's such a pertinent point. The importance of being able to sit in a space with one another and truly listen to each other rather than listen to respond, but for people to be really heard around what they're saying is really going to alleviate some of that stress. And even for just Indigenous Australians to understand that we have so many ways of saying no without saying no, and that we're so polite that we don't have these conversations. Like when we're trying to go, oh yeah, well, kunyul is a word I've recently learnt from Phil, but it's like we're trying to say no, but you're not listening or what have you. But the importance of sitting together and really listening is such an important conversation that I think we need to have. We've got to wrap up, unfortunately, but I've said previously that I'm really keen for these to be a series of ongoing conversations rather than us try and have a get-together once every 2 years and we call it a gathering, or what have you. How do we find a space where we can have an ongoing conversation? And I would love to have you guys back at some point, where we can just continue a conversation. I think it may not be around sport at all, and you guys are so much more than your sporting achievements, which has been shown to us today. It's huge achievements, don't get me wrong, but the depth of wisdom that comes out of both of you is just phenomenal. And, how do we continue to have these conversations is something that I'm really keen to explore more. I'm hoping that there'll be a point where I step out of the conversation and it just becomes a conversation rather than a led one, if that makes sense, but thank you both so much for your time today. Is there anything, I guess, a message you have for young men that are thinking about going into or wanting to go into the elite sports world, a message you have about how they ground themselves in well-being and take care of themselves through that process that you want to leave us with?
I got my young fella doing it at the moment. He's almost 16-year-old. He's all he wants to be is an AFL player. His whole life is devoted around and wanting to be an elite sports person. I was really lucky in my journey that my parents, because my dad played in the NRL as well, that my parents said, don't care about sport, worry about after sport. And for me, looking back at what the tips and tools that I'd give a young bloke is that all the wisdom that I have learned culturally as well has come after my footy career. Nothing. I didn't learn anything about who I was, and because I was in the machine of performing. So the wisdom that people like. I know myself personally. I'm not sure if I can speak for Dom, but the wisdom that we learn culturally comes during a process of growing into a man, but going through the process of becoming a man, which our young people have to look at prior to being NRL players. We need to look at the old ways of what worked for thousands and thousands of years because what we're doing now is not working. Right? So that's if I did what I did, if I went through business before I played footy, I'd probably still be playing. I wouldn't be, but you get what I'm saying, right? Is that
you're a gun, Joey?
No. It teaches you how to be. It teaches you how to be grounded. It teaches you how to be humble. It teaches you how to have relationships. It teaches you how to, all this stuff that we don't learn through sport.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Joe. That's really amazing wisdom. And Dom, would anything you want to leave us with on top of that?
Yeah, so I guess like you got, I think with culture and sport, coming together now, you got potentially, like, you hear stories about the guys in the olden days where Australia, through the history, a lot of the guys couldn't engage, Aboriginal players couldn't engage with their culture, so they didn't, couldn't build a cultural identity, but they could build a sport identity, and that, kind of kept them on the path, on the straight and narrow. But then now you've got, culture is coming to the forefront again in all across Australia. We've got, through this, panel and stuff, you've got great strong men all across Australia engaging in culture, which is what we want. And for sports stars, you've got the cultural identity and the sport identity. And when they come together, you can become like Jonathan Thurston's or whoever, you know what I mean? Just like an unstoppable force within the league. And that's what we need. Or someone like Adam Goods, or, just a really strong leader in that field.
No, definitely. Brothers, thank you so much. We say new buddy money in my lingo, big love. I've just learned so much from you guys, and I hope everyone listening in got just as much out of it. And as I said, I'll probably hassle you again to be part of another conversation further down the track. And Dom, first time meeting you online, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
So much, and Joe, always big love, brother.
See you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we certainly will, bro. And thanks, Phil, for the introductions and for your assistance.